I can't claim that I was at the lowest point in my life when the salesman knocked on my door. It would be easy to say that I was desperate and emotionally vulnerable, which made me fall victim to his dark influence. The truth is, I wasn't completely satisfied with my life. I had a decent job and a comfortable home, having inherited a fair amount of money after my mother passed away. I missed her, of course, but I coped with my grief as best as I could and moved on. Relationships were always a challenge for me. I had girlfriends but never married and had no children. I didn't even have close friends, just acquaintances, but no one I could trust with my deepest thoughts and dreams. Still, my social isolation never really bothered me. Since childhood, I had been somewhat of an introvert and found comfort in my own company. But there was something more to it. I always felt different from others, like someone who lived among people but wasn't truly one of them. I sensed that there was something inside me that wasn't entirely natural. For a long time, I believed this feeling was either a sign of mental illness or the result of some repressed childhood trauma. There was so much my mother never told me about my origins. In the end, it was the salesman who revealed the truth about my heritage. For better or for worse, Pandora's box had been opened, and my life had changed forever. My story spans generations and connects our mortal world with realms beyond human understanding. But for me, it all began on one quiet Saturday afternoon when the enigmatic salesman appeared at my front door. I only vaguely remember what I was doing that fateful day. As far as I can recall, I was searching for holiday deals on my laptop, sipping a cold beer while a football match played in the background. What I do remember clearly is the irritation I felt when I heard the loud knocking on my solid oak door, loud enough to cut through the noise of the television and reach me in the living room. Saturday afternoons were my personal time, and I wasn't keen on visitors, especially unexpected ones. I had a Ring doorbell installed, but the visitor chose not to use it, instead pounding on my door with unnecessary force. Annoyed, I opened the app on my phone, only to find that I couldn't access the camera feed. I suppose I should have been alarmed by this odd series of events, but at that moment, I was more angry than anything else, especially as the knocking grew louder and more insistent. I set my laptop aside, paused the match, and got to my feet, stomping down the hallway as the knocking continued. All right, I'm coming, damn it," I shouted. I was still fuming as I twisted the handle and pulled the door open, ready to give the uninvited guest a piece of my mind. But the moment I laid eyes on him, all my anger vanished. It's hard to describe the effect of seeing the salesman for the first time. He was not particularly striking or attention-grabbing. In fact, he appeared to be a frail, elderly man, small in stature, with a stooped posture, white hair, and deeply wrinkled skin. He wore a musky-smelling tweed suit with a bow tie and leaned on a walking stick with one hand while carrying a leather briefcase in the other. His lips curled into a disarming yet oddly unsettling smile, and his brown eyes sparkled with a youthful energy that didn't match his aged appearance. At first glance, he didn't seem threatening. Far from it. Even before he spoke a word, I felt an inexplicable sense of ease in his presence, my earlier annoyance fading away. Though I had never met him before, there was something oddly familiar about him, as if he were a long-lost relative who had suddenly resurfaced in my life. I struggled to find words, eventually stammering out a greeting. Hello? Uh, can I help you?" His smile widened as he spoke, his voice friendly, yet carrying an unsettling undertone. "Good afternoon, sir. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance." He extended his bony hand, and after a brief hesitation, I shook it. I expected his skin to be ice cold, but instead, his palm was warm, almost unnaturally so, as if a surge of energy passed from him into me. "My name is Mr. Black," he continued, "and I am a purveyor of rare books and encyclopedias. I believe my products will be of great interest to an intelligent and open-minded gentleman such as yourself. If you have the time, I would love to come inside and tell you more." As his grip lingered, I met his gaze, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something darker within those deep brown eyes, a hint of malice perhaps. A wave of emotions washed over me, curiosity, intrigue, but also apprehension and a quiet, creeping fear. Somehow, I understood that the choice I made in that moment would alter the course of my life forever. I could send him away and return to the quiet, ignorant existence I had always known. Or I could let him in and hear what he had to say. And of course, I chose the latter. "Sure, come in," I said, my voice betraying a nervous edge. Mr. Black, or whoever he truly was, released my hand, his smile unwavering as he nodded and stepped over the threshold. I moved aside to let him pass, watching as he made his way down the wooden-floored corridor, his walking stick tapping against the ground with each step. I intended to direct him toward the living room, but strangely, he didn't need my guidance. As if he already knew the layout of my home, he walked straight in, leaving me to follow. Before I continue, I should clarify a few things. First, I was fully aware that Mr. Black was not an encyclopedia salesman. That profession had long been obsolete in the modern world, where information was just a few clicks away. Second, I knew, at least on some instinctive level, that my visitor was dangerous, though not in any conventional way. He wasn't physically imposing, and I doubted he was armed. He might have been a con man, but something about his presence suggested his interest in me ran far deeper. I followed him cautiously into the living room. To my unease, he had already settled into a chair in the farthest corner, watching me with an expectant gaze. "Please, sir, take a seat," he said, raising a bony hand toward the couch opposite him. It was an odd reversal of roles, as if I were now the guest in my own home. And yet, without question, I obeyed. As I sat, I noticed him unlatching his leather briefcase with deliberate care. It was only later that I realized something disturbing. All my electronic devices, the television, laptop, and smartphone, were suddenly switched off, their screens black and lifeless. At the time, I hadn't fully grasped the significance of this, nor did I question it. My attention remained fixed on Mr. Black as he reached into the briefcase and retrieved a leather-bound red book. He handled it with such reverence that I instinctively knew it was important to him, perhaps more important than anything else in the world. The book itself was unremarkable at first glance, a deep maroon cover, devoid of title or ornamentation. The pages were yellowed with age, carrying the distinct musky scent of old bookstores and university libraries. I wish I could claim it was bound in human skin or inscribed with arcane symbols, but there was nothing visually extraordinary about it, and yet I found myself utterly captivated by it, unable to look away, sensing that whatever was written inside held a significance beyond my understanding. "Behold, sir, the greatest encyclopedia ever written," Mr. Black announced, his voice filled with conviction. His eyes gleamed as he gazed at me, his wrinkled face stretched into a knowing smile. "All the answers you will ever need are contained within these pages." I frowned, glancing at the book's thickness. By my estimate, it held no more than 500 or 600 pages, hardly sufficient for the sweeping claim he had just made. "This is what you're selling?" I asked, my skepticism evident. Mr. Black chuckled, shaking his head. "No, sir, I'm afraid not." I scowled, my suspicion deepening. "But you said you were a salesman," I snapped. "I did," he admitted, his tone calm, as if he had anticipated my growing hostility. "The truth is, I have held many positions over the years. Preacher, historian, emissary, salesman. In all cases, the common thread is storytelling." I scoffed, unimpressed. "So what? You're here to tell me a story?" "Oh, yes, sir." Mr. Black beamed as he carefully opened the book's cover. "I can tell you many stories. This wonderful book is full of them." "I see," I replied with thinly veiled cynicism. "Tell me something, old-timer. Ever heard of Wikipedia?" I was being deliberately facetious, challenging his grand claims. Why should I care about some dusty old book when I had access to all the information in the world at my fingertips? For a moment, Mr. Black looked confused, as if he genuinely didn't understand my reference. Then his expression shifted, and he chuckled in his usual good-natured manner. "Oh, you mean the World Wide Web? Well, sir, I'm afraid I'm something of a technophobe. But let me assure you, the tales within these pages will not appear on your internet." His confidence was unwavering, but I was unimpressed. I nearly laughed aloud at the absurdity of his claim, until my eyes drifted toward my phone, laptop, and television, all of which had gone dark the moment he entered. A cold prickle crept down my spine. This couldn't be a coincidence. But Mr. Black seemed oblivious to my unease. He was engrossed in his book, turning the pages with a reverence that bordered on obsession, his fingers tracing the faded text as if absorbing its very essence. "Now, let's see," he murmured. "What story would interest you, good sir? Perhaps the tragic saga of Emily de la Roque and her exile to the legendary Isle of Demons." He flipped through more pages. "Or shall I tell you the rules of the Shadowlands, where the damned stand in line between heaven and hell, awaiting the Almighty's judgment?" He paused, then looked up at me with a knowing grin, a glint of mischief in his deep brown eyes. "But let's not beat around the bush, sir. I know the story you truly wish to hear, the story of you, your past, your present, and, of course, your future." I snorted, but with less conviction than before. "You've got a chapter about me in there?" The salesman's smile faded slightly, the light in his eyes dimming. His energy seemed to drain, replaced by something more solemn. "Yes," he said, his voice quieter now. "You, sir, have a very prominent role in my book." Then, with a practiced ease, he began reciting details about me, my full name, date of birth, early life, education. I felt a flicker of unease. Of course, these were things he could have easily found through public records, social media, or any number of sources. It had all the hallmarks of an elaborate scam. And yet, something about the way he spoke, his certainty, his eerie calm, made me hesitate. But there was more. The salesman didn't just know my name and past. He also stated my date of birth as July 13th, 2066. I let out a nervous laugh. So you're a fortune teller as well as a storyteller? Oh no, he replied with an amused chuckle. I cannot tell the future. I merely go by what's in the book. But it has never been wrong yet. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, realizing my hands were trembling. This was ridiculous. Logically, this couldn't be real, and yet I believed him. I don't know if it was some kind of hypnotic charm, black magic, or just the deep-seated desire for validation that I'd never admitted to myself. But at that moment, I was hanging on his every word. I needed to know more. What else does the book say about me? I demanded. But instead of answering, Mr. Black lifted his gaze from the pages and looked toward the mantelpiece on the far side of the room. He raised his thin, bony hand and pointed toward a framed picture at the center. Your mother? He asked softly. I followed his gaze, my eyes landing on the familiar photograph. My mother's warm smile, her kind, sparkling eyes. A sharp pang of grief struck me. I missed her. Why had he changed the subject? Frustration bubbled inside me. I wanted answers, not a reminder of my pain. She never told you about your father, did she? I froze. A lump formed in my throat, and for a brief moment, I felt like a child again, small, vulnerable, uncertain. She did, I answered quickly, too quickly. My father died before I was born. Mr. Black gave me a sympathetic half-smile. That's not true, though, is it? You've always known this deep down, but you never confronted your mother, not even when she lay on her deathbed. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. How dare he? And yet, I couldn't deny it. Something inside me had always felt off, a truth I never wanted to face. Mr. Black gave me time to process my emotions before he spoke again. You wish to know your future, but first you must understand your past. Then tell me, I snapped. His expression darkened. For the first time since he'd arrived, his smile disappeared. I think not, sir, he said, his tone colder now. I came here with honest intentions, but I see now you are not ready for the truth. I stared at him in disbelief. No, you can't leave me hanging like this. I must know. Mr. Black closed the book. I will leave you with two names, he said, Charles Robinson and Fatima Abraham. Who the hell are they? I barked, a mix of anger and confusion surging through me. Mr. Black stood, his movements slow and deliberate. You have the names, he said simply, and with that he turned to leave. Seek them out and hear their stories. Piece by piece, the truth shall be revealed to you. But for now, sir, I will wish you good day and good luck. With that, the salesman carefully stood up from his seat and began walking toward the door. I sat there, stunned. Was this really how it was going to end? After all the cryptic riddles, the impossible knowledge, the eerie familiarity, he was just leaving? Number A surge of adrenaline shot through me. I could not let him walk away. I needed answers. In a split second, I sprang up from the couch, lunging forward. My hand grasped his arm, firm and unyielding. No more bullshit, old-timer, I growled, my voice shaking with fury. You're not leaving until I read what's inside that damn book. I expected him to recoil, to plead, to struggle feebly like any frail old man would. But I was wrong. Before I could react, he twisted violently out of my grip with a strength that should have been impossible for someone of his age. Then, with a force that sent shock waves through my body, He shoved me backward. I hit the floor hard, knocking the breath from my lungs. Dazed, I looked up and froze in horror. Mr. Black was changing. His eyes darkened, the whites consumed by an abyssal blackness. His mouth stretched unnaturally wide, revealing not teeth, but a gaping void. A sound escaped his throat, something between a hiss and a growl, raw and unnatural. "Damn it, sir!" His voice was no longer human. It was layered, guttural, like multiple voices speaking at once. I scrambled back, every instinct screaming at me to look away. "Do not test me." His tone was venomous, his face contorted in something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't far from it either. "Lay your hands on me again, and you will live to regret it." I believed him. I didn't need to be told twice. I stayed on the floor, watching in stunned silence as he adjusted his tie, picked up his briefcase and walking stick, and strode calmly out of the room. A moment later, the door slammed shut. And just like that, he was gone. But I knew, my life would never be the same again. Obsession took hold of me in the days that followed. I had to find him. I called bookstores, online sellers, any obscure publishing house I could find. Nothing. No trace of Mr. Black. No record of his so-called encyclopedia. The man was a ghost. So I focused on what little he'd left me with. 2 names, Charles Robinson, Fatima Abraham. At first the search was overwhelming. Thousands of people shared those names across social media. I had no locations, no ages, nothing. Reaching out blindly was pointless. Then I changed my approach. If Mr. Black was real, if his book was real, then surely I wasn't the only one searching for answers. I turned to online forums that specialized in the bizarre, the supernatural, the unexplained, and it was there, amidst conspiracy theorists, skeptics, and outright lunatics, that I found them. Charles, Fatima, 2 strangers, 2 different corners of the world. But they both had one thing in common. They too had been visited by Mr. Black, and they too had been left with questions that demanded answers. I was certain now this was real. Whatever had happened to me, it had also happened to Charles and Fatima. We had been chosen. By who or what? I still wasn't sure. For a while, I entertained the idea that this was some kind of elaborate trick. Maybe they were both in on it, playing me for a fool. But what reason could they have? What could anyone possibly gain from something like this? So I did my own digging, and I'm sure they did too. Charles and Fatima were, by all appearances, ordinary people. They didn't seem special in any way. No criminal records, no history of mental illness, nothing that stood out. Yet, the 3 of us shared unsettling similarities. We were single, introverted, and isolated. We all lived comfortable, yet unfulfilled lives. And we all had this gnawing feeling, this absence, like something vital had been hidden from us our entire lives. That was what connected us. That was why Mr. Black had come to us. Fatima Abraham lived in London, born and raised there. Her mother was English, her father Egyptian. She worked in finance, had no family, no pets, and few friends. Charles Robertson was from the American Midwest, a locksmith, running his own small business. Like Fatima, he had no spouse, no children, and kept to himself. And then there was me. I won't tell you where I live, not yet, but I will tell you what I learned. Charles and Fatima knew more than I did. Mr. Black had left me with nothing but questions, hints about my father, cryptic remarks about my destiny, but no concrete answers. Yet, for them, he had revealed secrets, secrets that had changed their lives forever. I'm going to tell you their stories, word for word, exactly as they told them to me, up until the moment they disappeared. And I'll start with Charles. Charles's tale. I don't know what to tell you guys about my upbringing. My family wasn't rich, but I was brought up right. I didn't know much about my heritage. Mom and Dad were always cagey on that subject. I always had this rage inside me. I don't know where it came from, but it was always there, like a shadow, lurking beneath my skin. As a kid, I was angry all the time. I got into fights, a lot of them. It was almost like I wanted to hurt people, like I wanted to see fear in their eyes. My parents, they were afraid of me. They never said it out loud, but I could see it, feel it. I tried to control it as I got older, but the thoughts never stopped. The violent fantasies, the intrusive urges. I never told anyone about them, not until now. My life after that, nothing special. I survived. I played the game, went through the motions. I don't even know why I became a locksmith. I don't like people. Hell, I barely tolerate them. But there was something about it. Having the keys to their homes, being able to step into their private worlds without them knowing. It gave me a kind of power, a secret, twisted power. I never acted on those impulses, though. I buried them, locked them away, and I probably would have kept doing that, if not for him. You guys know the story. The salesman, the briefcase, the book. When that freak showed up at my door, talking about encyclopedias, I was ready to tell him to go to hell. But something stopped me. Something made me listen. I don't know why, but I let him inside. And that's when everything changed. At first, he told stories. A hidden museum filled with relics from a future apocalypse. A phantom bus full of ghosts and ghouls. I don't remember all the details, but they terrified me. Then he got to the real story, my family story. It all goes back to my great-grandfather, Ivan Robson, a monster. Between 1922 and 1930, Ivan butchered at least 11 people across the tri-state area. 11 is what he confessed to. The real number could be dozens more. He was one of the first serial killers in the Midwest. His weapon of choice? A butcher's knife. He'd slice their throats from ear to ear, a savage, meticulously executed kill. And then he vanished. Charles's tale continued. The most chilling part of the story? Ivan was exactly like me. He was a locksmith too, just like I was. That's how he broke into his victims' homes. He knew how to get in without making a sound. He knew how to hide in the shadows, waiting. And when they came home, he was ready. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ivan Robson, my great-grandfather, used the same profession I had chosen for myself to carry out his gruesome acts. He would move from town to town, scoping out new targets. He'd learn their routines, their weaknesses. He was the perfect predator. But the most horrifying thing, he'd wait until they returned home, unsuspecting. And then he'd strike. The more the salesman spoke, the more I could feel it, this connection. It was as though his words weren't just stories. They were some kind of dark ritual. It wasn't just reading. It was as if he was pulling me into the past, forcing me to live it. I could feel the knife in my hand, the cold steel pressing into my palm. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my veins, the fear, the bloodlust. I could see it, see the victims. I was there, hiding in a stranger's house, waiting. And when they walked in, I revealed myself. They screamed. Some fought back with everything they had. I had to stab them repeatedly before they fell. Others cowered, begged for their lives, but it didn't matter. I killed them, one after another. No remorse, just cold, merciless violence. And the worst part? I felt like I was becoming Ivan, as if the blood on his hands was coursing through my veins, too. The more I researched, the darker things got. The realization hit me. I wasn't just learning about Ivan Robson anymore. I was becoming him. I could feel it deep down, the rage, the darkness. It was like I had unlocked something buried deep within me, something I never wanted to find. The idea of reveling in those gruesome memories, the screams, the blood, the terror. It wasn't just horrifying. It was strangely satisfying, almost like I was becoming a part of that violent legacy. And for a while, I thought I could let it go. But I couldn't. As the salesman's story unfolded, I felt like I was living it, inhabiting Ivan's body, experiencing everything in vivid detail. And when the police finally caught up to him, it was like I was right there with him, feeling the sweat on his skin, the fear as Detective Underwood loomed over him. Underwood was intense, not just in size, but in presence. His eyes, they were full of malice, a dark kind of hatred that went beyond mere anger. He wasn't just a cop, he was a predator. And my great-grandfather Ivan was terrified of him. That's something I never expected. A serial killer, scared of a cop. But there was something about Underwood's presence that made him tremble. The violence in his eyes, it was palpable. Underwood didn't give up. He didn't stop. He beat my great-grandfather, trying to force a confession out of him. And I felt every blow. It wasn't just words. I wasn't imagining it. I was there, feeling the pain, the fear, the helplessness, the sweat, the exhaustion, the terror of knowing you can't escape. Finally, Ivan was forced to confess. He didn't want to, but after hours of torture, he had no choice. I was angry, not just because of what Ivan had done, but because of the way he was treated. No one deserves that. No one deserves to be broken like that, no matter how guilty they are. Then came the execution, the worst part of the story, the part that made my skin crawl. They strapped Ivan into the electric chair, and I felt it. The fear, the burning pain as the electricity coursed through his body, frying him from the inside out. I could feel every muscle contract, every nerve scream in agony. It was all too real, too vivid, too much. And then, just like that, it was over. The darkness took me, and I was back in the present, sitting on my couch, trying to process everything that had just happened. But there was no time to digest it. The salesman finished his tale, closed his book, and made to leave. I tried to stop him, of course. There were so many unanswered questions in my mind. But I couldn't. He was stronger than he looked, and he wasn't giving up any more answers. And just like that, he was gone. My life was no longer my own. I couldn't go back to who I was before the salesman came. Too much had been revealed. Too much had changed. I knew I had to keep digging, just like Fatima and you. So I dove deeper into the history of Ivan Robson, the family secrets, the curse that seemed to have been passed down through the generations. I also turned my attention to this salesman, this mysterious figure who seemed to show up at exactly the right moment, and I started asking questions on forums, paranormal ones, the kind of places where people share their darkest, most twisted stories. That's where I learned more than I ever wanted to know. The chilling tale I just shared doesn't just end with Charlie's final post. After hearing his words, there was a lingering fear that we'd all been swept up in a delusion, that maybe, just maybe, Charlie's rage was more fiction than reality. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had been warned by someone who wasn't entirely in control of their own darkness. And then the news broke. On the 23rd of March, a 32-year-old locksmith named Charles Robinson broke into the home of a prominent defense attorney, Caleb Underwood, with one chilling goal in mind: vengeance. Charlie had convinced himself that his family's bloody legacy needed to continue, and the name Underwood was the target of his obsession. However, things didn't go according to plan. Charlie had expected to find a house empty, but instead he encountered Isabel Rodriguez, the maid. The following moments were described as a violent struggle, one that resulted in Isabel's tragic death. Charlie had stabbed her 13 times in a frenzied attack. Yet, it wasn't just a random act of violence. Charlie didn't stop there. After the murder, he moved her body into the bathroom, keeping himself hidden in the home, awaiting Caleb Underwood's return, as if the horrific ritual he was enacting needed completion. But it wasn't meant to be. When Caleb Underwood returned, he fought back, overpowering Charlie and managing to subdue him until the police arrived. It wasn't the kind of end Charlie had imagined for himself. Instead, he was left defeated, standing as a man who had tried to continue his great-grandfather's legacy of violence but couldn't even execute his plans. The details of Charlie's arrest were haunting, but they also painted a picture of a man possessed, driven by rage, bloodlust, and a warped sense of duty to his ancestor. The authorities did their job, charging Charlie with murder and attempted murder while denying him bail. And as news spread, the connection between Charlie and Ivan Robson, the notorious serial killer, was uncovered. It was clear. History had repeated itself. For me, and I suspect for Fatima, we both felt shaken. We had read Charlie's words, witnessed his spiraling descent, and yet we chose to do nothing. Our curiosity had kept us silent, waiting for a resolution we didn't want to see unfold. But it had unfolded, and in the most horrific way possible. Now, there is nothing left to say about Charlie Robinson except that the story has concluded in tragedy, a tragic attempt to inherit the darkness of a long-dead ancestor. Charlie's tale is a grim reminder of how the past, no matter how far gone, can haunt us, consume us, and drive us to the edge of madness. As for me, I will never forget the way Charlie's post twisted its way into my own mind. Sometimes, I wonder if that dark force is something we can truly escape, or if, like Charlie, we are doomed to be shackled by the weight of bloodstains from centuries before. Let's just hope that the darkness stays buried. Fatima's voice held a strange calmness as she began her story, though the weight of her words seemed to carry a deep, unspoken sadness. There was no pretense in what she shared, just raw truth, stripped of any embellishment. She spoke of a fractured childhood, marked by her parents' divorce. The rift with her father, one that had lasted years, seemed to be the first crack in the foundation of her sense of self. Fatima's early life was shaped by rebellion, her rejection of her father's faith, her stubbornness in turning her back on the values that once defined her upbringing. She admitted to feeling a sense of arrogance during her student days, as though she had the world figured out. Yet there was always a quiet emptiness beneath it all. Her relationship with her mother was a simple one, defined more by routine than by emotional closeness. The sudden passing of her mother due to a stroke seemed to affect her more in a practical way than an emotional one. She grieved, yes, but there was no profound sense of loss. Instead, there was an almost detached sadness, an acknowledgement of her mother's absence, but not the grief one would expect from someone who had been especially close. Then came the relationship, the one that had been the most significant in her adult life, the one that had lasted 5 years. Yet, as Fatima recalled, the breakup wasn't marked by pain, but by a strange relief. Her boyfriend had told her she had become cold and distant, but it wasn't the words that struck her. It was the truth in them. Fatima knew deep down that the disconnection was real. She hadn't fought for the relationship. She hadn't pleaded for him to stay. Instead, there was this quiet acceptance of the end. There was a feeling of detachment, a sense that she couldn't or wouldn't allow herself to feel deeply for anyone. It had troubled her for a long time, the fact that she couldn't form connections with others. There was no closeness, no intimacy. She sought help, but none of the therapists or psychiatrists could provide the answers she desperately sought. The absence of human connection gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside by immersing herself in her career. Numbers were reliable. They didn't demand anything. They were simple, predictable, and safe. So Fatima threw herself into the world of finance, a world where success was measured in dollars, deals, and achievements. She climbed a corporate ladder, excelling in a job that demanded long hours and total commitment. In a sense, her work was the one constant in her life, the one thing she could control. But despite the success, despite the money and career advancements, Fatima felt empty. There was always this void, a place where relationships should have been, where emotions should have been nurtured, but instead, it was just a hollow space. It was clear now. Fatima had spent much of her life running from something. Perhaps it was from the trauma of her broken home, or from the deep-seated need to avoid intimacy and vulnerability. She had spent so much time in her head, in her work, and in her isolation that she had lost touch with what really mattered: connection, trust, and love. It wasn't until everything started to unravel with Charlie's story that Fatima's walls began to crack. Something in the air shifted, and she found herself drawn into a web she couldn't escape, one that had been spun by Charlie's twisted legacy and the dark path that both he and her own life had begun to mirror. Fatima's story was one of detachment, but it was also the beginning of her realization that the real answer she sought wasn't in her career, in the numbers, or in the walls she had built around herself. It was in the raw, painful, and terrifying truths about her own emotional landscape. As she continued speaking, it was clear that her journey wasn't just about understanding Charlie's descent into violence. It was about facing her own darkness. And for the first time in her life, Fatima might have been ready to confront what lay buried deep inside her. Fatima's words hung in the air like a heavy fog, her voice trembling with the weight of what she was about to reveal. For the first time, there was a sense of vulnerability in her tone, something beyond the walls she had built for herself. She began with a quiet frustration, speaking of that gnawing feeling of alienation, of living a life that felt foreign to her, a stranger in her own skin, going through the motions, surviving rather than truly living. But then there was the salesman, the one who had knocked on her door that day. At first, she had been skeptical, cautious. But there was something in the way he spoke, in the way he shared his tales of the paranormal and unexplained that transfixed her. His stories weren't just idle fantasies to him. They were a truth he was trying to unveil. And Fatima, with her rational mind, found herself drawn in despite herself. He spoke of the red phone box that connected with the afterlife, of the cursed model village that devoured its creator, of a parallel universe where lost ships and planes had vanished forever. All these stories seemed so outlandish, so contrary to her logical worldview, yet the power of his words made something stir within her, something she had long buried. He had awakened emotions that she had suppressed for years, emotions she hadn't even known were there, buried under the weight of her career and her detachment. But it wasn't until he revealed her true identity that everything changed. The salesman didn't just connect her to Charlie's tragic past. Instead, he took her back in time, all the way to the 17th century, to an ancestor who had suffered a grave injustice. Her name was Mary Claiborne, a young mother of two, married to a Puritan minister in Norwich, Norfolk. Her life was marred by tragedy and abuse, as she was trapped in a cycle of violence with no way out. Her husband was a man of uncompromising cruelty, a figure who believed in the harshest of disciplines, not just for his children, but for his wife as well. Fatima's face darkened as she continued. The salesman's words had transported her back in time, as if she had lived it herself. She could feel her ancestors' suffering, the isolation of living in a rural cottage, the cold nights, the helplessness of being unable to call for help. She could see herself as Mary fighting to protect her children from the uncontrollable rage of her husband. There was nowhere to turn, no one to help. It was a nightmare that mirrored the desperation of Charlie's story, but it was different. It was a deeper, more personal horror. And then the revelation that left Fatima shaken. Mary wasn't just an ordinary woman. She had powers, powers that Fatima had once dismissed as mere superstition. But now she knew better. Magic was real. Mary could communicate with animals, read people's thoughts, and move objects without touching them. Fatima could feel the tangible energy in the air as she imagined herself in her ancestors' place, witnessing her miraculous abilities, knowing that these powers were her inheritance, something she too might possess. Fatima felt the ground shift beneath her feet as she realized that everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, about the world, might be a lie. The past had a strange way of resurfacing, especially when it carried such intense power. And for Fatima, the question became not whether this was real, but what it meant for her, what it meant to be connected to a lineage of powerful women trapped in cycles of pain and violence, yet capable of extraordinary feats. Her connection to the past had come alive, and with it came a new reality, one that neither she nor Charlie could ignore. This was no longer just about them or their dark histories. It was about something bigger, something that spanned centuries and threatened to pull them both into a destiny they could. She recounted the chilling memories that surged through her, her words carrying the weight of something ancient and painful. She spoke of Mary's small, careful use of her powers, the secret ways in which she had learned to manipulate her surroundings, all the while hiding her true abilities from her husband and the community. She knew the consequences of being caught, death. And yet, in the depths of her fear and anger, Mary had found a strength to strike back. The moment the minister came home in a blind rage, his accusations of devil's influence and corruption adding fuel to his fury, Fatima was thrust into the past. She could feel the terror and pain of being shoved out of the way by the man she had once called her husband. As Mary, she confronted him at the top of the stairs, but in the violent exchange that followed, Fatima felt everything: the rage, the fear, the power. In that instant, it wasn't just Mary's pain. It was Fatima's as well. She was Mary. She channeled that surge of energy, that violent retribution, and with a single invisible force, she sent the minister tumbling down the stairs. His body cracked and twisted, and his neck snapped upon hitting the floor. Fatima felt a grim satisfaction, a sense of justice that went beyond mere vengeance. The monster had fallen, and for a moment Mary's suffering seemed to be over. But then she turned her head, and the weight of the violence hit her in full force. There, in the doorway, stood Mary's children. There, the salesman continued his reading, his voice indifferent to the pain that Fatima was reliving. He spoke of Mary's fate, of her trial and conviction for both murder and witchcraft. On the 12th of September, 1645, Mary was sentenced to death by burning at the stake. Fatima's chest tightened with fury as she thought of the injustice that had been done to her ancestor. How could anyone sentence a woman to die for defending her children? How could they label her a witch for using her own powers to protect herself from a monster? But then, in a surreal turn, the salesman's words transported Fatima back to Mary's trial, to a courtroom filled with hate and fear. Fatima was once again Mary, terrified as the crowd called for her blood, screaming for her to be burned alive. The magistrate, a man of absolute malice, relentlessly declared her a whore and a witch, his words cutting through the air with venom. He sentenced her to burn with a glee that turned Fatima's stomach. The man's eyes, full of hatred, locked onto her, and for a brief moment she wondered who the true devil was in that room. But the worst memory, the one that shook Fatima to her core, was the night of Mary's execution. She could feel the heat of the firewood, the rough ropes that bound her to the post, her body shaken with fear and helplessness. She screamed, begging for mercy, but none came. The crowd of Puritans, their eyes burning with self-righteous anger, were ready to make her suffer. Torches and pitchforks glinted in the night as they cursed her, the woman they saw as evil incarnate. A minister spoke the final words before the flames would rise. Fatima felt every second of the horror, every inch of the fiery torture that would soon consume Mary. In those moments, as the flames grew, she knew that this wasn't just the story of a woman who had been wronged. It was a story that had been passed down through generations, a story of suffering, power, and ultimately, justice. A justice that Mary would never see, but that Fatima now carried with her, deeply embedded in her soul. Fatima took a deep breath, her voice growing cold as she finished. Mary was forgotten by time, but she wasn't forgotten by me. Her pain, her rage, her power, it all runs through me now. But guess what? I wasn't satisfied. I'm sure you felt it too. The sense of being a stranger in your own life, like a zombie, just going through the motions. That's when the salesman appeared at my door. My initial reaction was just like yours, filled with suspicion. But I let him in, still unsure. At first, I was hesitant. But when he pulled a book from his briefcase and started reading, everything changed. His words gripped me. He told me stories of the paranormal, things I had never imagined, like a red phone box that could communicate with the afterlife, a cursed model village that devoured its creator, and a parallel universe that became the final resting place for countless lost ships and planes. I didn't usually buy into such tales. I considered myself logical and educated, with little patience for superstition. But his words reached deep within me, awakening emotions I hadn't felt in years. And then, before I even realized it, he revealed something I never saw coming: my true identity. Unlike Charlie, my connection to the past wasn't so direct. My family's dark history wasn't something that happened in recent memory, but it was a tragedy nonetheless. The salesman took me back to the 17th century, where an ancestor of mine, Mary Claiborne, endured a tragic fate. Mary was a young wife of a minister living in Norwich, Norfolk, during the 1640s. Her life was far from peaceful. Her husband was a strict Puritan, a man who believed in punishment, not just for his children, but for Mary as well. The abuse she suffered was unimaginable, and the salesman described it in such vivid detail that I felt it too. Her pain, fear, and helplessness. I could almost feel the cold nights in that rural cottage, the fear of being alone, trying to protect her children from a violent man. But Mary wasn't completely helpless. She had powers, abilities I had once dismissed as nonsense, but now I knew they were real. Mary could communicate with animals, read minds, and move objects without touching them. She used her powers in secret, always careful to hide them from her husband and the community, knowing that discovery would lead to severe consequences. But the minister knew something was amiss, and his rage only grew. One night, in a blind fury, he came home, yelling about the devil and accusing his family of corruption. He charged up the stairs, his cane raised in anger. Mary stepped in his path, but he shoved her aside, rushing towards the children's room. I was there, in that moment, feeling Mary's pain and anger as if they were my own. I couldn't stop it. In a surge of power, I unleashed an invisible force that threw the minister down the stairs. Watching him tumble, I felt no remorse, just satisfaction as he landed at the bottom, his neck snapping with the force of the fall. But as I looked up, I saw Mary's children standing in the doorway, eyes wide with shock and terror. I couldn't take it back. The salesman continued reading, revealing the rest of Mary's story. On September 12th, 1645, Mary was sentenced to death for murder and witchcraft, to be burned at the stake. I couldn't believe it. The injustice was overwhelming. But there was more. The salesman took me back to that moment when Mary stood before the court. I was in her body again, terrified as the crowd cried out for her death. The magistrate, who was filled with pure hatred, condemned her, calling her a witch and a whore. His eyes burned with malice, and I could feel her terror as he sentenced her to burn. Then I was pulled back to the night of her execution. I was once again in Mary's body, bound to a post with firewood beneath me. I could feel her shaking, crying for mercy, but none came. The crowd, full of self-righteous anger, called her every vile name. And as the flames spread, I could feel the searing heat, starting at my feet and rising, consuming me. I saw the magistrate in the crowd, a twisted smile on his face, taking pleasure in her suffering. The pain was unbearable, and just before I blacked out, I felt Mary's agony, the fire consuming her body. The salesman brought me back to the present, but he didn't offer any explanation. There was one last thing he said before leaving, something that didn't make sense at the time. The magistrate's name was Underwood. This revelation stayed with me, consuming my thoughts. I became obsessed, just like Charlie. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I took a leave from work and spent every day searching for answers. There was no direct connection between Caleb Underwood in Kansas City and the magistrate who had sentenced Mary, but I traced the Underwood family's lineage. I discovered that one of his descendants was now a government minister in the UK. I know this sounds crazy, but I couldn't let it go. I had inherited Mary's powers, and I couldn't ignore the need for revenge. I honed my abilities, practicing every day, learning the skills of my ancestor. I couldn't stop. I had to do it for Mary. And then the news came. On May 15th, UK Education Minister Thomas Underwood was attacked outside a secondary school in South London. The assailant was 31-year-old Fatima Abraham, a finance worker with no prior criminal record. Witnesses later stated that Miss Abraham approached the minister as he was engaging with the press and public. Somehow, she managed to slip past Underwood's security team and stabbed him with a concealed knife. Despite being wounded, Mr. Underwood fought back, managing to subdue his attacker and throw her to the pavement. Miss Abraham, undeterred, picked up her weapon and attacked again, despite warnings from the police officers present. In response, a plainclothes detective fired at her. Officers rushed to administer CPR, but unfortunately, she died at the scene. Meanwhile, Mr. Underwood was rushed to the hospital where doctors performed surgery on a severe stab wound in his right shoulder. Fortunately, the government spokesman later confirmed that the minister's injuries were not life-threatening, and he was expected to make a full recovery. The Metropolitan Police stated that Miss Abraham had no history of violence and no known ties to extremist or terrorist groups. They are now investigating a possible motive behind the attack. After reading about Fatima's failed attempt, I deleted all the messages she had sent me. By then, disbelief had taken over. The salesman had provided me with 2 names, and now both individuals were dead. Both had tried to kill men named Underwood. The name itself resonated, but no matter how hard I tried to recall, I couldn't remember where I had first encountered it. I plunged into frantic research, discovering that there were numerous prominent people with the surname Underwood. Politicians, media figures, business leaders, and more. However, they all seemed unrelated. Underwood was a name that appeared all over the English-speaking world, and in other languages, the surname had various forms. But despite my efforts, I couldn't find any clear connection between them. The mystery consumed me, pushing me to the brink of madness. I couldn't sleep at night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the salesman's twisted grin, Charlie hanging in his cell, and Fatima's blood staining the pavement. I couldn't understand why this was happening or how I was involved. One sleepless night, the salesman returned. I was lying awake in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, exhausted but unable to find rest. The clock struck 3 a.m., and then I heard it. The loud knock at my door. I shot upright, every sense heightened as a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. Without hesitation, I raced to the door, throwing caution aside. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with the shadowy figure standing on my doorstep. His face, illuminated by the porch light, was familiar, but different. It was the salesman, of course, the one who called himself Mr. Black. But this time, he looked nothing like the confident Greenwich man I had met before. Gone was the spark in his eyes. His trademark wide grin had vanished. Instead, he appeared as though he had been dragged through hell itself, standing before me on the brink of death. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mouth agape in shock, unable to find words. Finally, it was the salesman who broke the silence, his voice low and raspy. "Good evening, sir. I apologize for the late hour of my visit. May I come in?" I hesitated for only a moment before responding with an enthusiastic, "Yes, of course." I stepped aside to let the elderly visitor enter, watching with a mix of concern and sympathy as he relied on his walking stick for support, carefully making his way down the corridor. It was clear his physical condition had worsened since his last visit, but what caught my attention more than anything was the familiar briefcase he carried in his left hand. I knew all too well what it contained, the knowledge I had been desperate to uncover. I followed him into the living room, flipping on the lights as I anxiously watched him struggle to find his seat. I was frustrated that he didn't immediately open his case and reveal the encyclopedia I longed for. Instead, he simply stared at me with tired, bloodshot eyes. After a brief, tense pause, he spoke, and there was a sadness in his words that I hadn't expected. "So, you tracked down Charles and Fatima?" "I did." "And you know what happened to them?" "I do." I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, and after another moment of silence, I finally blurted out the question that had been burning in my mind. "So, who is Underwood?" The salesman fell silent, his gaze distant for a moment as he processed my question. When he spoke again, it was with a hint of reluctance. "Underwood? Yes, my employer has used this name for a long time." He trailed off, and I was left waiting for more. But all I could do was voice my frustration. "But there's hundreds of Underwoods. The name keeps showing up throughout history, but there's no connection. None that I can find." He slowly nodded, his gaze dropping as if lost in thought. "No connection you can find," he said. "You think of these Underwoods as individuals, but in truth, they are all vessels of my employer. They are all the same, whether it's the magistrate, the detective, the attorney, the government minister, and of course, your father." His words hit me like a blow to the chest. I was stunned, my mind racing as I tried to comprehend what he had just said. "My father?" I stammered. "How is this possible?" The salesman's expression remained grim. "Oh, it's possible," he replied quietly. He seemed to carry the weight of this revelation with him, as though it pained him to share it with me. "Your mother, no doubt, had her reasons for keeping the truth from you. But my employer's blood flows through your veins," the salesman continued. "Your heritage carries immense power, but it also comes with great expectations." "What do you mean?" I asked, my frustration growing as his words remained cryptic. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, then his tone darkened. "My employer has worked for centuries to shape humanity's history. Over this time, he's tried to recruit many mortals to his cause, but the results have been disappointing. Take Mr. Robinson and Miss Abraham, for example. We had high hopes for both, but they ultimately failed." "What does that mean?" I demanded, still not understanding. "Your friends were tested," he explained, "and they failed. My employer expects much more from you, after all, You are his flesh and blood." A chill ran down my spine. What does he want me to do? The salesman shot me a half grin, and for a brief moment I saw a spark flicker in his tired eyes. He didn't answer my question directly, though. Instead, he changed the subject. "You look unwell, sir. Have you been sleeping?" His voice was concerned, but I could sense the underlying tone of urgency. Baffled and irritated, I struggled to respond. "No, of course I haven't." The salesman nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his briefcase. My heart raced as I expected the encyclopedia to finally appear. Instead, he pulled out what appeared to be a business card. Confused, I watched as he struggled across the room towards me, holding the card in his trembling hand. "You really should see a doctor, sir," he advised. "You can't neglect your health, not with so much important work ahead of us." He placed the card on the coffee table before standing up and heading toward the door. I felt a surge of irritation and was about to shout at him, but instead I glanced down at the card. The text on it sent a cold wave through me. Dr. Mark Underwood, M.D., family physician, open to new patients. The front door slammed shut behind the salesman as he disappeared into the night. But it no longer mattered. The truth had clicked into place. I now knew exactly what had to be done, and it was up to me to prepare for the grim task that awaited. I didn't waste any time in formulating my plan. After gathering all the information I could on my target, I destroyed my electronic devices, put on gloves, a scarf, and a baseball cap, and armed myself with a .38 revolver and a stiletto dagger. But make no mistake, my goal was never to confront Dr. Underwood and demand answers. No, my plan was to kill him. To anyone hearing this confession, the sudden and drastic shift in my actions might seem confusing. After all, I was a man with no criminal background, no history of violence. There was no personal animosity towards Dr. Mark Underwood. The salesman had told me Underwood was my father, and I believed him. But Dr. Underwood was the same age as me, which made it impossible for him to be my parent. None of that mattered, though. It was clear to me now. All these Underwoods were the same, vessels for something far more powerful and unseen. The pieces of the puzzle were finally in place. I understood what I had to do. Charlie and Fatima had both failed. They had come with anger, seeking vengeance for the wrongs done to their ancestors, but I was different. I had a clear mind and no moral hesitation about ending the existence of this vessel. I would kill him and fulfill my destiny. I arrived at the address on the card, a building tucked away off a busy commercial street. With my head lowered and my cap pulled low, I walked along the pavement, trying to avoid attention and stay out of sight of any security cameras. My weapons were hidden deep in my jacket pockets. The revolver was my primary weapon, the dagger my backup, but I wouldn't draw the revolver unless absolutely necessary. When I reached the front of the surgery, I paused to read the name on the glass door to confirm I had the right place. I had deliberately come at lunchtime, knowing the surgery would be closed and nearly empty. The door was unlocked, which struck me as odd, but I pushed past the momentary feeling of unease and cautiously stepped inside. The reception area was deserted. Even the front desk was unmanned, probably because the receptionist was on lunch break. I felt a strange satisfaction in the silence and solitude. I continued into the office area, making my way toward Doctor. Underwood's office, which to my surprise was wide open. I paused at the threshold, watching him as he sat at his desk, typing away at his computer, completely engrossed in his work. Dr. Underwood was a handsome man, well-groomed and tidy, but entirely unremarkable. There was nothing about him that screamed paranormal entity. He was simply a family physician, just like any other. In that moment, doubt gripped me like a vice. Had I made a terrible mistake? I stood frozen in the doorway, my fingers wrapped tightly around the butt of my gun, my mind racing. I needed to act, but I couldn't. It didn't take long for Dr. Underwood to sense my presence. Whether he saw my shadow or simply felt the weight of my hesitation, I wasn't sure. Without looking up from his screen, he called out casually, "I'm afraid the surgery is closed. Please come back later." I didn't answer. Instead, I slowly pulled the gun from my jacket. Underwood sighed in annoyance, finally turned his head away from the monitor. But the moment his eyes met mine, something strange happened. Recognition flashed across his face. "Ah, it's you," he said almost cheerfully. "I was wondering when you'd turn up." Then his gaze flicked downward to the gun in my unsteady grip, and his expression darkened, not with fear, but with something eerily close to amusement. "So that's how you plan to do it?" he mused, more intrigued than concerned. "Well then, let's get on with it." What happened next left me paralyzed with shock. In a single, fluid motion, Underwood leapt onto his desk, crouching low like a predator ready to strike. His eyes gleamed with a wild, animalistic fervor, and when he hissed, revealing disturbingly sharp teeth, my blood ran cold. I reacted too slowly. With terrifying speed, Underwood sprang from the desk, lunging toward me with his fangs bared. Panic surged through me as I fired a single shot, missing completely. A second later, he crashed into me like a freight train, knocking the gun from my grasp as we tumbled backward. I hit the ground hard, the air forced from my lungs, and before I could react, he was on top of me, pinning me to the carpet. His breath was hot and foul, his lips curled in a vicious grin as saliva dripped from his jagged teeth. "Come on, my boy," he taunted, his voice thick with mockery. "Is that really all you can muster?" Then his hands closed around my throat. A sharp, crushing pressure stole the air from my lungs. I gasped, my vision blurring as I fought against the darkness creeping in at the edges of my mind. I was dying, but I refused to go out like this. With the last of my strength, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the stiletto dagger, plunging it deep into his thigh. Underwood let out a guttural cry of pain, his grip loosening just enough for me to act. I drew in a ragged breath and kicked him with every ounce of strength I had. He reeled backward, blood seeping from his wound, but he wasn't finished. Not yet. I scrambled to my feet. Gripping the dagger tightly, I lunged at him, but he was faster, dodging my attack with ease. Then, with brutal force, he drove his fist into my face, pain exploding behind my eyes as I stumbled backward. Before I knew it, I was thrown back into the office, blood dripping from my nose as Underwood loomed over me, still very much alive. I pulled myself up from the floor just as Underwood launched another attack. Instinctively, I held out the knife, but he was faster, grabbing my wrist and twisting it violently. Pain shot up my arm, and the blade slipped from my grasp, clattering to the ground. I barely had time to recover before he struck me again, sending me sprawling back onto the cold floor. Dazed and gasping for breath, I watched As Underwood calmly stepped over to where the knife had fallen, he bent down, picked it up, and turned toward me with an almost disappointed look. "Very disappointing," he murmured, shaking his head. "I expected so much more from you, my son." The words cut deeper than any blade ever could. Now or never. My eyes darted across the floor, locking onto my silver revolver lying just inches away. Underwood was already moving toward me, the knife glinting in his hand as he prepared to finish what he'd started. Summoning every ounce of strength, I lunged for the gun, gripping it tight as I rolled onto my back. Underwood was almost on top of me, his knife raised. I fired 1, 2, 3 shots rang out in quick succession. The bullet slammed into his chest, each impact jolting him backward. At first, he barely reacted, staring down in surprise as dark blood seeped through his once white shirt. Slowly, he looked back at me, a strange half-smile forming on his lips. "Well played, sir," he said, his voice faint. Then his body collapsed to the floor. He didn't move again. For a long moment I lay there, my breath ragged, my hands trembling as I stared at the smoking gun. The room felt eerily silent until I sensed movement in the doorway. I spun around, my finger tightening on the trigger, but I didn't fire. Standing there, as composed as ever, was the salesman. His familiar briefcase dangled from one hand, his sunken eyes scanning Underwood's lifeless form before shifting toward me. "Congratulations, sir," he said in a measured tone. "You have succeeded where so many others have failed. Now, I believe it's high time you met my employer." I barely had time to process his words before a sudden wave of dizziness overtook me. My vision blurred, the room spun, and then darkness. When I awoke, heat pressed against my skin like a living thing. I pushed myself up from a rough, rocky surface, blinking hard as my vision adjusted. My breath caught my throat. I was no longer in Underwood's office. Instead, I stood inside a vast, dimly lit hall, carved from dark stone. Flickering torches lined the walls, their flames casting eerie shadows that danced across the towering ceiling. I took a cautious step forward, my legs shaking beneath me as I took in the surreal scene before me. Lining both sides of a long central walkway stood rows of armored soldiers. They looked human, but something told me they weren't of this world. Each wore bronze armor and helmets reminiscent of ancient Roman centurions, their eyes hidden beneath the shadow of their crested helms. In their hands, they gripped long spears and round shields, standing rigidly at attention. Their presence made one thing abundantly clear. Wherever I was, escape was not an option. The guards stood in tight formation, statuesque and unyielding. Though they remained still, their dark, menacing eyes followed my every step as I made my way forward. The long, echoing hall led to an imposing throne of cold iron, its presence dominating the chamber. Seated upon it was a giant of a man, if he could even be called that. He was draped in flowing black robes, his bald head crowned with a wreath of twisted thorns. He had the shape of a man, but his sheer size was unnatural. Easily 8 feet tall, his bulging muscles pressing against the fabric of his garments. He was feasting as I approached, his massive hands tearing into a slab of raw meat. Blood dripped from his chin as he took great, gluttonous bites, pausing only to wash it down with large gulps from a golden tankard filled with something thick and dark. He ate with savage pleasure, his expression one of cruel amusement. When he had his fill, he tossed the bone carelessly to the ground. A ragged man in chains scurried forward from the shadows, snatching up the discarded scrap as though it were a prize. Another figure, a woman silent and gaunt, stepped forward and refilled the giant's tankard before vanishing back into the darkness. Their movements were meek, their presence insignificant. They were slaves in this dreadful place. But there was another figure, one that stood apart. A small man cowered behind the throne, clutching a thick book bound in red leather. His head was bowed, his body rigid with submission. It wasn't until I drew closer that realization struck me. It was the salesman. Gone was his usual smug detachment. Here, he was no more than a frightened servant clutching his book, the fabled encyclopedia, the source of his power, with trembling hands. But if even he was reduced to this, then the true power in this realm sat before me. The giant's icy blue eyes locked onto mine, his blood-stained lips curling into a cruel grin. "Ah, there he is," he rumbled, "the man of the hour, my own flesh and blood, come to claim his rightful place by my side." I stopped at the foot of the Iron Throne, staring up at him in horrified awe. My mind raced, struggling to process his words. Who are you?" I stammered. The giant chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that filled the hall. "Come now," he said, his voice laced with mockery. "You are an intelligent young man. Surely you can guess. I go by many names, both in this realm and in the world above." He leaned forward, his grin widening. "I am king here, but you may call me father." The word hit me like a physical blow. Father. My stomach twisted, my breath catching in my throat. Was this the destiny I had unknowingly pursued? Had I fought my way here only to stand before him? "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice unsteady. The demon's grin deepened, his amusement palpable. "I want you to become the man you were born to be," he said. "You have passed your first test, but there is much work to be done." He snapped his fingers. The salesman flinched at the sound, his grip tightening on the book, before, reluctantly, he stepped forward. With a visible shudder, he handed over the red-bound encyclopedia. The giant snatched it from him without a second glance, flipping through the pages with impatient hands. The salesman slunk back into the shadows, as if hoping to disappear, and then the giant began to read. His voice carried a strange, otherworldly power. As he spoke, the words wove themselves into reality, pulling me into something beyond this place, beyond this time. I was no longer in the hall. I stood upon a great podium, banners and flags draped behind me. A vast crowd stretched out before me, thousands upon thousands of people, their eyes alight with fervor. Their cheers were deafening, their devotion absolute. They were my followers, a cult dedicated to me. Next came the vision of a vast military procession. From a high balcony, I looked down upon the endless sea of black-clad troops marching in perfect formation. Their boots struck the asphalt in rhythmic precision, their salutes crisp as they goose-stepped beneath me. Behind them rumbled a column of tanks, their steel forms gleaming beneath a darkened sky. Fighter jets screamed overhead, streaking across the heavens in a show of absolute dominance. Then the vision shifted. A prison camp emerged before me, its perimeter marked by towering barbed wire fences and watchtowers bristling with armed guards. Thousands of prisoners huddled together within the enclosure, gaunt, hollow-eyed, their faces etched with fear and hopelessness. Some reached out towards me, their trembling hands pleading for mercy that would never come. My stomach churned. But it only got worse. The demon's voice guided me deeper into this nightmare, forcing me to bear witness to horrors beyond comprehension. A city in flames, its streets reduced to rivers of fire, a nuclear inferno consuming the skyline, a mushroom cloud rising like a grotesque monument to annihilation. The cries of millions echoed through my mind, then silence. Only ruins remained, the remnants of a civilization I had doomed. And then, I was no longer on Earth. I drifted beyond the stratosphere, looking down upon the ravaged planet from orbit. The world was lost, its surface charred and broken, and I had abandoned it. My path had led me to a new beginning, within a vast biosphere encased under a shimmering dome. The land beyond was red, barren, a lifeless desert. And yet, I was not alone. Beside me stood those most devoted to my vision, the fanatics, the loyalists, the chosen few who had followed me into this new world. They were here to build something new, to rise from the ashes. Billions had been left behind to perish, and we had watched from our sanctuary untouched by their suffering. The vision shattered. I was back in the throne room. My body trembled, my breath ragged. The demon's piercing blue eyes bore into me, cold and unrelenting. Revulsion surged through me, hot and defiant. "This is horrifying," I spat, my voice thick with rage. The demon merely shrugged, his expression unreadable. "That," he said, "depends on your perspective." I clenched my fists. "It's monstrous, and I will not be part of it." The words left my lips before I could stop them. For a moment, I braced myself for his fury, but there was none. Instead, his grin remained, his composure unshaken. "Ah," he mused, his voice slow, deliberate. "I think you will, my child." His fingers drummed against the armrest of his throne. "My blood runs through your veins," he continued. "You may resist, but I know you better than you know yourself. I know the darkness buried deep inside you, the savagery, the cruelty, the hunger for power." He leaned forward, his presence suffocating. "And there's another reason." He tapped the red-bound book in his grasp. "The events you've seen, the war to come, it will happen, with or without you. You cannot change fate." His grin widened. "And you do not want to disappoint me, my son." The Demon King clicked his fingers, and from the shadows behind him, two figures emerged. The slaves, a man and a woman, the very ones who had silently served his food and drink. I had barely glanced at them before, dismissing them as mere specters in this nightmarish realm. But now, as they stepped forward, their terrified faces came into focus. Their eyes, wild, bloodshot, desperate, locked onto mine. Recognition struck me like a hammer. Fatima Abraham, Charles Robinson. My breath caught in my throat. The names echoed in my mind, ripped from headlines, from social media posts, from a past I thought was lost. They had failed him, and now they were condemned to an eternity of servitude, bound in chains, subjected to his sadistic whims, forever trapped in this hellish domain. A cold shiver ran through me. I knew this would be my fate too if I refused him. I couldn't look at them any longer. My gaze dropped to the jagged stone beneath my feet, shame and horror twisting inside me. "Well, now you know the truth, my boy," the Demon King said, his voice smooth, yet laced with menace. "It's time for you to return to the mortal realm. Think carefully about what I have said, and know that I am always with you." He clicked his fingers again. Darkness swallowed me whole. When I awoke, I was back on my couch, in my front room. Back where this had all begun, I've had time to think, to analyze, to search for any logical explanation for what I experienced, but none exist. Dr. Underwood's murder went unsolved. The police and media called it a robbery gone wrong. There was no evidence linking me to the crime, no connection uncovered between Fatima, Charlie, and me. It was as if some unseen force had wiped it all away. The only conclusion I can draw is that it was all real. I don't just remember what I saw. I feel it deep in my bones. The darkness inside me is real, and I can't suppress it any longer. I don't know if the future I witnessed is inevitable. Perhaps I can change it. Perhaps I can stop the war before it begins. Or maybe the war is doomed to happen, and my only choice is to decide who survives. One thing is certain. I have been chosen. I have proven myself worthy in my Father's eyes. The future belongs to me now. I won't tell you my name, but soon you'll know me well. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an election to win. Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I know I've been gone for a while, and I wanted to give you all an update on what's been going on. The main reason for my absence is that I've been extremely sick. It started with COVID, then the stomach flu, and then bronchitis, which I still have. But thankfully, I'm feeling much better now. The worst of it at this point is just a lingering cough, but overall, I'm on the mend and excited to start making videos again. On top of that, a family member moved in with me, and I ended up giving them my office space to sleep in. That made it tricky to find a quiet place to record, but I finally found a way to get back into the swing of things. Since it's been a while, I want to try some new stuff for the channel. I'm thinking about bringing in some guest narrators for the next few videos. Maybe someone like Romnex, TJ Lee, or Spirit Voices, kind of like how Romnex did for part of the Whistlers. Anyway, I just wanted to check in, let you know what's been going on, and say that I'm so happy to be back. I hope you enjoyed this story, and as always, I'll be hanging out in the comments. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.